Hello and welcome to the Ethics of Jesus, a closer look at the Sermon on the Mount. Once we get into the class, you'll see me in a small corner over here, I think, so you can focus on the content of my slideshow presentations. But I thought for this greeting, it would be nice to see you face to face, as it were. My name is Cody Cook. I have a BA in Biblical and Theological Studies and an MA in Biblical Studies. I live near Cincinnati, Ohio. I'm married. I have 3 kids. When I'm not studying theology or doing dad stuff, I like writing, watching classic movies, and listening to funk music. So that's me. Really hope you enjoy the class, and let's get right into it. Let's start with a definition. Ethics is the branch of philosophy that deals with moral principles and values. There are different types of ethical philosophies. There's consequentialism, also known as teleological ethics. And for teleology, the idea is that an act is right if it leads to the right consequences. Example, someone might say it was right for the United States, to drop atomic bombs on Japan because it ended the war and may have saved more lives in the long run. So that's a pretty controversial example of teleological ethics, but nevertheless it is an example. Second kind of ethical philosophy type you might run into is deontology. Deontology or deontological ethics argues that an act is right if it's in accordance with moral duties, regardless of the consequences. And so the example I'll give here, another sort of controversial one, just basically I'm just sort of giving examples that sort of push the push it to maybe it's kind of logical extreme. But so deontology might say, well, it's always wrong to lie. Therefore, it would be wrong to lie to the Gestapo about hiding an innocent person in your attic or under your floorboard. Third kind of ethical philosophy that you might run into, and I don't remember if my actually I don't really have an extreme example here, but is virtue ethics. The goal of ethics, according to virtue ethics, is the development of one's character to practice virtues which are in accordance with enlightened self-interest. So example, temperance is a virtue not necessarily because it's a duty to avoid pleasure or even because it always ends well, but because it's in your best interest to install this virtue. So temperance is this idea that you're going to sort of find a balance between the extreme of never indulging in anything good and overindulgence, drunkenness, that kind of thing. So virtues are generally seen as the balance between opposing extremes. Courage would be a virtue because it balances cowardice on the one hand and rashness on the other. And as we are looking at how Jesus fleshes out his ethical viewpoint in the Sermon on the Mount, you might ask which of these 3 best summarize his approach, or perhaps it's none of the above. So be interested in hearing some of your guys' feedback as you're thinking through that. So what is the center of Jesus' ethics? Since Jesus was a Jew, some have argued that the entirety of the law of Moses, which are numbered maybe perhaps 613 laws in all, sum up his ethical viewpoint. However, Jesus also famously summed up the law of Moses by appealing to 2 of its laws. And there's this passage in Matthew 22 where someone comes to him and says, "Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law? Which is the greatest commandment?" And Jesus says to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and foremost commandment. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Upon these 2 commandments hang the whole law and the prophets." And New Testament scholar Scott McKnight calls this formulation, these sort of 2-point laws, love God, love your neighbor, the Jesus Creed. As we dig deeper, I think that what we'll find is that the love for God that Jesus has in mind is one marked by trust and obedience. To love God is to obey him. You can't obey God's sometimes difficult commands if you can't trust him. So while many have tried to separate pieces of Jesus' ethics from his views about God, this isn't how Jesus envisioned his ethic being lived out. So as we work through this class, if you don't believe in God, you may have to sort of suspend your disbelief if you want to see morality and ethics the way Jesus did, to kind of walk around sort of in his shoes and see the world the way he did. I'm going to argue that the key verse in the Sermon on the Mount is Matthew 6:33. Seek first God's kingdom and his righteousness. Jesus urges his hearers to not worry about money, pride, and security above all else. Instead, he tells them, and us, since we're reading it, to trust and follow God even when it makes our lives harder, because God will reward us for our obedience. So there is definitely a theistic component to Jesus' ethics, and we'll get into that a little bit more. And that is the end of Lecture 1.